So we have a very esteemed panel today who will help us understand these environmental, social, cultural, economic impacts that inland waterways is having in terms of what kind of habitat, river ecosystems, river hydrology, and also communities living along the river, how their livelihoods are impacted because of inland waterways. And so without much further ado, I'll first welcome the lead presenter of today's session, and that's Nachiket Kelkar. Nachiket heads the Riverine Ecosystems and Livelihoods Program at Wildlife Conservation Trust India, and his long-term interdisciplinary research and conservation engagements have concerned themselves with conservation of riverine wildlife with a focus on river dolphins, livelihoods of fishing communities, and social and hydroclimatic change in the Gangetic Plains. He's also a member of the IUCN's cetacean specialist group. Cetacean is aquatic mammals like whales and dolphins. So Nachiket has given us a pre-recorded presentation. We'll play that, and he's also joined us as a panelist. So I would request all of you who have joined as attendees to share your reflection, comments, or question in question and answer box. And we will take them when we move towards the latter part of this session, where we'll be sharing questions and our comments. So Siddharth, can you play Nachiket's presentation?
Yes, just 1 minute. I'm just going to play this. One second. For some reason, it's not letting me share my sound.
Okay.
If you don't, if you're not able to do it, I can do it from here.
Shripad, could
You
you
can try.
Thank you. Please try.
Give me a minute. I'll just try.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Nachiket Kelkar, and I will be speaking today on the social, environmental, ecological, and livelihood impacts of inland waterways in the Ganga Basin. I thank the Indian
see the
organizers for this opportunity.
Sorry?
We can hear it.
No, that's because my screen, I'm just setting it up. Just give me a minute to
Okay.
just give me a minute to set it up. Oh, because it started in a this thing.
Right.
Started in a whatever. I need to share screen. वो थोड़ा क्या है? It comes on the top of the screen, so it creates a bit of a problem.
Right.
Just give me a minute. No, Windows Media Player. Now, can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, I'm going to just play it, see if you can hear the sound, and I'll start it from the beginning.
Yeah.
Sure.
The mention of inland waterways
Yes.
we
can.
Those of floating terminals.
Okay, so I'm going to start it from the beginning now. Okay.
Yes. Thank you so much.
All right.
My name is Nachiket Kelkar, and I will be speaking today on the social, environmental, ecological, and livelihood impacts of inland waterways in the Ganga Basin. I thank the India Rivers Forum organizers for this opportunity to speak. The mention of inland waterways evokes varied images, those of floating terminals, large ships crisscrossing our rivers, hydrographic survey vessels going and doing their thing, barges, dredgers, and so on. And all this is part of the grand vision. The image that you see here is of the Pearl River waterway of China. And if you look at the projections made by optimists about inland waterways in India, they somewhat reflect this grand vision, which is geared primarily towards industrial goods transport, as well as various other transportation and logistics objectives. Waterways have also been promoted as cheaper in terms of transportation costs, as well as carbon friendly. And somewhere this has been linked to the general discourse on waterways being environmentally more friendly than road transport or air transport. However, as we shall see today, there are various ecological dimensions of impacts which don't remain ecological, but they deeply affect the riverine environment and the people that depend on these rivers. So in this context, if we look at the rivers of India, I would say that the waterways can be called a haystack, not a straw, put on a sick camel's back. You know, if we look at, if we think of the proverb of a straw on a camel's back. I say this because there are already severe pressures on our rivers from dams, barrages, and so on, pollution, and several other issues, on which now waterways is going to be an additional stressor or impact. There are various modalities of this impact, which we shall examine. The main ones are from dredging of river sediment to make enough depth for waterways and ships to fly. Underwater noise from ship traffic. Water infrastructure like ports and jetties and other things that result from creation of waterways or development of waterways, and various other related impacts. Now I'm going to broadly look at impacts on ecology and environment, and also related impacts on society, safety, and river-based livelihoods. I'll also speak about the links between waterways and climate change, and the connections between river interlinking and waterways, which are going to be future challenges in terms of understanding how these impacts will build up in the future. This is a map of India's inland waterways. About 111 rivers have been originally listed in the Act, of which 50 or 60 are going to be prioritized. I don't know the exact latest figures, but they are soon to be prioritized for such development. And if we look at the number of dams and hydropower projects existing in the Ganga basin alone, that's also quite vast. And we know that flows have been compromised in most rivers of the Gangan basin, on which the waterways is definitely going to be a synergistic pressure. To summarize these cumulative impacts, already most rivers have large dams or barrages, and water is diverted into canals, or the river flow is regulated by embankments built on both sides of the river. Dams and barrages have led to poor and altered river flows. Pollution is also quite severe, or at least significant in most stretches. And with waterways, further changes are to be expected to these flow regimes. In some cases, water levels might go up because ships need that much water to fly, which will further be alterations on the existing nature of flow regimes. And in some cases, of course, rivers don't have enough water in the first place. So my engagement with waterways began in 2016 when we first heard of this mammoth sort of scale. Waterways were already there in the country, right from the 1980s. And of course, the National Waterways Act in 2016 envisioned a much larger commercial and industrial overhaul of using these resources as waterways. And we shall gradually examine their ecological impacts. So first, let us look at dredging. Dredging has various impacts, but primarily they can be summarized as the three listed here. The first is alteration to local sediment fluxes, because dredging disturbs sediment at the river bottom and affects erosion deposition processes. If dredging is happening in an area which is already undergoing deposition, or which is near embankments which are causing erosion of the bank, they can further potentially interact with these erosion deposition processes and have feedback mechanisms. Further, the removal of in-stream sediment and silt can impair their function as pollution buffers. So as we know, the rich sediment and silt fluxes in the Ganga are an important reason why the Ganga water is considered as pure, because various pollutants, including heavy metals, pesticides, etc., are often adsorbed by this sediment. And if that is going to be removed, obviously we are going to mobilize such contaminants. The other impact of dredging is related to underwater noise and sediment churning or wave action caused by the dredger operating. This can have effects on fish and various other species, including underwater dolphins. So I think what is important here to consider is that dredging is typically thought of as a quick fix or solution to the waterways viability and development. But what we need to really question is whether it's actually part of the larger problem of looking at sediment only as an impediment to our flow of rivers, rather than as an integral part of river ecosystems. The fact that dredging leads to release of sediment-bound contaminants, both bacteriological as well as chemical, is not new. This is well known. This is a paper from 1975, which shows how fecal coliforms get suddenly released because of dredging. This is from the Mississippi. There's another paper which shows how various other contaminants get released. This can be heavy metals or various other toxic compounds and so on. Now let's come to the impacts of underwater noise on. I'm going to talk about one example which I am familiar with, which is the Ganges river dolphin, which is India's national aquatic animal. And the river dolphin, as some of you may know, is completely blind and needs to echolocate in its dark environment in order to create, feed, and move. So, for such a species which is so heavily dependent on the soundscape of our rivers of the Ganga basin, underwater noise is likely to be a significant limit. And in some sense, we have been among the lead researchers to study this because we started acoustic studies on Ganges river dolphin behavior and presence in a certain site and so on from 2013-14 onwards. Since then, we have been monitoring these impacts. I'll just show an illustration. So this is how dolphin clicks look in a graph. On the y-axis, you have frequency, and on the x-axis, you have time. And each of those bars that you see here, those lines, vertical lines that you see, are basically a click emitted by the dolphin. And what happens when a ship passes that area? The entire click spectrum gets masked. Now, this is just an illustration, but it's a very powerful illustration of how an animal which is so heavily dependent on sound for living is likely to get affected. These are from cavitation noise, which is the sound made by propellers moving in the water. We also published this work, and this was the first scientific study on the impacts of vessel noise, which were affecting river dolphins in interaction with shallow river depths. The summary was that the impacts are potentially quite severe. The cavitation noise has significant masking ability for river dolphin frequencies. As the flow of the river reduced in the dry season, the vessel noise increased. And under acute noise conditions, dolphins showed enhanced acoustic activity, including changing frequency, which is not easy to do. Changing the energy in the frequencies of the clicks that they emitted. And under chronic noise, dolphins tended to suppress activity. And we estimated that this would lead to significant metabolic costs to river dolphins. There are also impacts on other species, like dredging can cause severe impacts on benthic species, particularly because so much sediment is being churned that macroinvertebrates, fish, turtles, insects, and so on, their habitat is likely to be disturbed very significantly and severely. Secondly, fish and shrimp sounds are of a much lower frequency. So engine frequencies are much lower, and many fish, because they are also living in the same murky habitats like rivers of the Gangetic plains, and they also depend a lot on sound for social communication and so on. And this is also likely to get impacted. Wave action has also been demonstrated to have mechanical injurious impacts on a range of organisms. In fact, there is an ESC report about navigation along the Farakka feeder canal, which mentioned that even plankton get injured because of the wave action caused by ships. And finally, there are indirect effects which still remain unstudied. These are related to active sonar-based surveys caused by hydrographic vessels, which are important, but they may have damaging effects on various aquatic organisms. Stress effects, pollution-induced effects of waterways still warrant much more study. There are also impacts on society, safety and livelihoods at large. And of course, among the set of river-based livelihoods, fisheries are likely to be the most affected. These impacts can include even simple things like you can't take your boat out when there is a ship passing because there is a risk. Or because of wave action, there may be mechanical damages or risks to fishing traps, fishing gears, which lead to opportunity costs for people only dependent on fish for their livelihoods. Recently, you must have also heard of this horrendous news about how 57 or 55 or 60 buffaloes, along with the two herders that were carrying them, actually got killed because of a dredger operating in that area. This was from Bhagalpur in Bihar. And not only are these accidental risks serious concern and rising concern, the fact that riverside people may also lose their land or face exclusion from the river commons that they have always depended on and even continue to depend on is a matter of concern. For example, one of the reactions after this incident of the dredger linked deaths of these buffaloes, one of the reactions from the dredger operators was that they will create a zone where buffaloes will not be allowed to cross. So, directly this affects the regular, practices that people living along the riverside, floodplains, and so on are used to. A major impact if you look at their lives and their dependency on their age-old practices. Riverboat accidents, I guess we will slowly lose count of such unfortunate incidents. But these are happening, and it's only a matter of time until the severity will have to be addressed in a more serious manner. We also have heard of the fly ash accidents happening along the Hooghly River and also in Bangladesh. It's again an increasing concern. The other thing that is again less studied is how ships may directly contribute to pollution and also cause bioinvasion. For example, ships may be also moving in estuaries or in the sea and then coming upriver, which means that they may carry invasive microorganisms or mollusks or even fish sometimes in their ballast water. How that is disposed, what is the potential for species invading our rivers, non-native species invading our rivers. All these things need to be understood in a better way. Not to forget that the Waterways project has been planned in conjunction with river interlinking plans in India. And at least all along the major rivers of the Ganga basin, as we see here, some link or the other has been planned. And this is again a serious concern which can lead to potentially irreversible damage to our riverine ecosystems, as well as to the people dependent on. Now, I would say that there are also interesting opportunities and challenges that we are going to witness as the scale of this project goes up. And these can be of various kinds. One interesting one is on international navigation, because as we know, these waterways are not going to just remain Indian waterways, but they are going to also become Indo-Nepal and Indo-Bangladesh waterways. It's definitely in the plan. And this might have, I see some opportunities because there may be scope to improve river flow management so that international sharing of water is made more equitable in order to run the water. So this is something that we still don't understand very well, but we need to probably look into. Secondly, there are trade-offs between how much water we are able to allocate nationally for our needs versus international sharing when waterways are concerned. And these are trade-offs because obviously water is finite. And we don't know what is going to even happen to that water under increasing stress and scarcity and climate change. So naturally, these trade-offs are going to kick in. So as there are opportunities, there are also going to be serious challenges. The other point is that with river interlinking, with international navigation and all these large-scale projects, ecological risk remains the same. It's not that if you give more water to the river, then you're ameliorating ecological damage. It's probably not the case. The reason being that these flows are artificial. So if the river actually is going to witness an ebb in the dry season, there may be much more water than fish are used to. So, or even fishermen are used to. So that way, even when water levels may become more uniform instead of the natural flood rhythm or the flood pulse that these rivers are naturally used to. And all these are basically things to look into. And Finally, with climate change in the Ganga basin, we are already starting to see the impacts of it, under which we see increased river flows and flooding in the near future. And there are predictions that there will be recurring and severe droughts further ahead as the snow melt rates increase and precipitation reduces in the Gangetic, which are processes that have been quite well documented. So what happens to water availability and therefore to waterways under climate change is an important ecological question for us, because it will also have impacts on how physico-chemical regimes change in rivers, how biological productivity of river ecosystems will change under these altered conditions under climate change. I think there are a few ways forward towards this. So already there have been many EIA studies that propose several mitigation measures. These include things like redesigning propellers or speed limits or putting bubble curtains to prevent the impacts of dredging from spreading too much. But as of now, there are no studies to actually test their effectiveness in the field. And I think some experimental studies are critically needed in order to understand this. Carrying capacity studies. This is another thing where, waterways carrying capacity studies can be conducted, but they need to be ecologically guided. They're not simply volumetric calculations, that if you have so much discharge in the river, you can ply so many number of ships. Instead, what is needed is what would be the optimum where without disturbing ecology much, you are still able to meet the needs of society dependent on water navigation or transportation. I personally see regulation by downscaling the projected traffic as the only end solution to this. Because ultimately the number of ships and vessels plying is going to be the key determinant of how much we are able to mitigate the impacts of ecological risks caused by water. So I would end here just by suggesting this idea that somewhere while thinking of waterways or expressing our concerns, we probably now need to look beyond this cycle of the project proposal being submitted for a waterway, then there is an EIA process, then there is an EAC clearance, and that is followed by a whole set of affirmations and legitimization that okay, this has followed the clearance process, so this must be fine, and then let it operate the way. And I think we need to go beyond that, because this is going to be a thing for society to monitor jointly together with the state. As we also know, there are self-limiting factors in waterways. As I said, water is finite, river discharge is going to be finite. So naturally, there are limits set by nature to such development, and I think these need to be understood better and looked into. There is definitely scope for optimization to have waterways alongside a thriving ecology. How to do that, we need to look into these things. And I think monitoring becomes a critical part of all this. It needs to become a continuous process in order to have a science society policy interface towards looking at waterways. Because this is what is ultimately going to determine what guides our societal choices. And I also hope that our definition of society has to be wide enough and will be wide enough to not only accommodate river-dependent people who live on the margins of society, but also several species and ecosystem processes that are key to our survival and existence. With that, I will end here, and I would like to thank these organizations, people and funding agencies for their support to our work related to waterways. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks, Nachiket ji, for sharing this really comprehensive presentation, especially because you took us from impacts to ecology, people's livelihoods, and then to also possibly looking at what challenges and opportunities we have in this kind of a situation, and how do we need to move forward about also thinking in this direction where the science, society, and policy comes together. And I especially liked the fact that society's idea that you articulated should be much more broader and comprehensive, which also includes more than human in our conception of what it is. So thanks for that detailed presentation. Nachiket ji is part of the panel. So people who are listening, you have questions, comments to this very comprehensive presentation. I think there are several aspects, especially in opportunities and challenges that might need more exploration. So please put in your questions in the question and a box that's available on your screen. So now we will move towards our panel discussion. And we have six very esteemed panelists with us who will be now going further into several aspects that in some ways Nachiket's presentation also highlighted. So getting more specifically into what are environmental, social, cultural, livelihoods impacts that people are facing in different regions and what do they really mean, and how do we move forward with that. So I will first welcome Eric Moselman, and I will introduce Eric, and then Eric, it's over to you. You have 10 minutes. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll stop you around 8 minutes, just to let you know that your 10 minutes are coming close to end. So Dr. Eric Moselman is with Deltaris. He is an expert in river engineering and fluvial morphodynamics and hydrodynamics. He's worked on Rhine, the Meuse, the Brahmaputra, the Ganga, Indus tributaries, the Amazon, Rhone, Loire, and numerous other rivers. He developed and applied his knowledge in projects of bank protection, river bank protections, river training, safety against flooding, navigability improvement, and ecological river restoration, as well as in academic research. And today he will be sharing insights on the issue of Brahmaputra as a sustainable inland waterway. So over to you, Dr. Eric.
Thank you for your introduction, and I will share my screen. Is it visible to everybody?
Yes, we can see it. Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon. Namaste to everybody. I am very happy to be able to share a few reflections on development of the Brahmaputra as a sustainable inland waterway. And it's a formidable river. This is a picture taken in Bangladesh, but actually also this part in Bangladesh is part of the Indian National Waterway Network because it's the connection between Kolkata and Assam. And it's an amazing river beyond imagination for many people because what you see in the distance, this strip of land, is not the other side, it's not the bank, it's just an island. Because the river is about 10 kilometers wide. And not only very large, it's also very mobile. And it gives great problems to management, of course, to the riparian population, because bank erosion along the river can be enormous and cause a lot of damage and misery. But also to develop this into a waterway for navigation is really a challenge. But different initiatives are going on now, paid by Bangladesh, of course, government, but also the Indian government and also the World Bank is involved. So how to do that? How to develop a sustainable inland waterway? There are different methods or principles. Of course, we can think of traditional hard structures. They are supposed to be permanent, but there are also many soft and more recurrent structures. Interventions. And the examples for recurrent interventions are, for instance, dredging, but also building with nature that can also consist of dredging, but also of a clever deposition in certain locations to steer the morphological development, but also actively work with vegetation to steer the river into a certain morphology. Then there are temporary structures, cheap structures that are used during the dry flow season, the dry season. For instance, Bandles has a long tradition in India. And there are the aids to navigation, because in such a river, not everything needs to be done through structures, but also simply signaling the channel, the navigation channel, placing buoys, and also surveying the river and then producing updated navigation charts is a way of improving the waterway. And all that opposed to the hard traditional river training structures that also have a role, that are often popular because they involve a capital investment at once and then are supposed to lead to little cost for maintenance afterwards, whereas recurrent interventions require expenditures every year. That's why some people would say sustainable is when they are hard and permanent, because we can sustain them also when we have little money. But this is not the intended meaning of sustainable. Also, the PIANG, which is the International Organization for Navigation, has a different definition, as is exposed here. Sustainability implies not a minimum of maintenance, but that the short-term and long-term effects are such that they don't leave a legacy of significant impact that future generations find unacceptable or cannot change. That is, I think, the definition that we should use. In that context, so we have a lot of experience. This is just an overview of different interventions on the Brahmaputra to stabilize the banks, to improve the navigability on the way. They are exposed here, but given the time, I will not explain them all, but they are all they are permanent, they are temporal, recurrent from different sites on the Brahmaputra. But I would like to highlight one effect that is often overlooked and actually also leads to regret in Europe now, because in Europe we have optimized waterways like here, the River Rhine, by permanent river training works, and the disadvantages, the adverse effects become apparent only 50 or 100 or 150 years later. And now many restoration investments are needed to mitigate those. So why are there negative effects on the long term? This is something that everybody understands. If you improve navigation by narrowing a river, or maybe also narrow the river by placing embankments to prevent flooding, then the water will be confined in a narrower space, and it will lead to larger fluctuations in water level between floods and dry season, and also higher flood levels, so a higher risk of flooding. What is less well understood is what happens with the longitudinal profile, which is indicated here. So it is a drawing that is very much distorted, compressed, because vertical dimensions of the river depths are in meters, but the horizontal length here could be kilometers or tens of kilometers. And what happens with this longitudinal profile in the long run when a part is narrowed? That is this. The narrow section erodes, assumes a flatter slope, and it means that the water levels go down in the narrowed reach and in the long term also upstream. And it has all kinds of negative effects. For instance, lower water levels make irrigation more difficult, and also the flow into distributary rivers. But also they have an effect on the surrounding land because they draw down the groundwater tables. Floodplains may dry out, wetlands may dry out, with repercussions on ecology. And even if such an intervention is meant to improve navigability, it could also deteriorate navigability. For instance, this bedrock that may be buried under the sand bed may be exposed and then form obstacles for navigation. And very often also a river is just a part of an inland waterway network. So it is connected to canals, ship locks, ports, and those don't go down when the river goes down with its water levels. So in the end, there is a mismatch in the system.
Eric,
Yes?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, I'm about to close. So in Europe now, also on the River Rhine, this is mitigated by maintenance, by adding sediment to the river all the time. You see it here happening with a ship that regularly adds sediment to the river, which of course is costly and also puts strains on resources that are also needed for other purposes. So to conclude, with the Brahmaputra in particular, because it's so difficult, we need to respect it if we think of solutions. And solutions are often hybrid, not just permanent structures that maybe cannot always be avoided, but also an array of softer structures. And then it's not a blueprint. We need to adapt our approach to what happens with the river, learn by doing, monitor the effects, and also seize the opportunities that the river offers itself when acting in a certain year. And in general, be careful. Caution is warranted with narrowing of a river, and the same holds for sediment extraction. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Eric, for being on time, but also for such a interesting presentation on what could be sustainable inland waterways. And I think I agree with your point that solutions can be hybrid. And so coming up with more hybrid understanding of what possibly ground solutions could be is a good way to go about. So thank you for your presentation. And we'll move to our next panelist, Zeenat Muji from Kerala. Zeenat is a resident of Kanoli Canal Front, and she completed her BE from Sabu Siddiq College of Engineering, Mumbai in 2002. And she did her MTech from MNNIT Allahabad in 2014 in Geo-Environmental Engineering. She's also worked as a guest lecturer in Civil Department in Engineering College in Kerala. And she will be today speaking with us about environmental and social issues regarding the conversion of Kanali Canal into a major waterway in Kozhikode. So Zeenat, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Over to you. You also have 10 minutes and I will stop you at around 8 minutes. Thank you.
No issues. Thank you. I'll share, okay? So can you see me? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it well. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll start. So very good evening to all. What I'm going to present here today is a small story of a canal. Not only the canal, but the people living around it. And first of all, I would like to sincerely pay my gratitude to IRF for giving such a platform to be in front of this people present over here, not only on my personal behalf, but also from the behalf of my people who are residing near this canal. Okay, so this canal is going to be transformed into a national waterway. That is what said. And the residents are like, whether it is a must or a waste. So just let's look into this beautiful canal. As the name goes, Kanoli Canal, I'll just introduce you first the canal. It was actually built in 1848, so almost 170 years old canal by the then collector of Calicut, Mr. Henry Valentine Connolly, after whose name the name is given as Kanoli Canal. It is around 11.2 kilometers long, and it is located in the northern district of Kerala, called Calicut or Kozhikode. You can see the location of Kanoli Canal. Okay, the blue line in between the city area, passing through the city area. Okay, so the width of this canal varies between 6 to 20 meters, and the water depth during monsoon varies between 0.5 and 2 meter. The canal was constructed by this Connolly by keeping in view the needs of then British government for transporting the cargo movement, because at that time the road networks were not that developed. So they wanted to have from sea route to inland, to carry the cargo and passenger movement, and also to protect the city from flood. This water was also used for irrigation and farming. Also, the water was clear so that people could also bath and wash their clothes and all. So the canal was in a very good condition at that time, though it is not the picture of that time canal. Okay. And the flora and fauna was very varied. Flora and fauna was present at that time. Many researchers have worked on this. They have found 134 species of birds, including some migratory birds. But that is not the case present now. Okay. So many snakes are found, many reptiles, fishes, mangroves, around 240 species of plant community was also present. So what is the present condition of canal? What is the problem with the canal? Okay, you might be wondering that, right? So at the end of 1970s, canal was deepened unscientifically, which led to the stoppage of water flow and further discharge from the nearby hospitals, like, untreated effluents, they are discharging directly to the canal from nearby hotels, industries, etc. Further to that, eutrophication led to the highly polluted water. So now the canal has become breeding ground for mosquitoes, wastes, and weeds. And at several places, the side walls of the canal have been damaged, and at some places they have collapsed also. So you can see the present condition of the canal. You can see the quality of the water. Sometimes it goes even worse, but still, like, I have lived in northern part of the country also, so I know it is still better. It's not sinking and all. You can see the sand piling and the coconut piling used for to prevent the further erosion of the side walls of the canal. So actually, this portion is just in front of my house. You can see they have repaired the canal with RR masonry, and there are a lot of silt is accumulated, a lot of plastic waste because the flow of water is blocked. You can see aquatic weeds also. Actually, many people still do morning walk and, me even included in that. So we can hear the chirping of birds and the calmness or the peace of mind it gives, it's a lot, it cannot be described in words. So what government did in 2016, I guess, like, they have given a proposal for widening of this canal. So they want the minimum width of canal to be maintained 14 meters. So total cost of the project for this is said to be 1,100 crore. So a lot of acquisition of land is required with construction of new bridges and modification of the existing ones. And the purpose of widening is said that for cargo movement and tourism. So what are the possible effects of widening? As far their calculation goes, like, from the reports the government have made, they are saying that evacuation of 530 houses and 110 shops to be done. Then this demolition of these houses and shops will lead to the environmental pollution. Rehabilitation of such displaced population will put extra load on natural resources for new construction. Obviously, there will be a loss of livelihood, loss of flora and fauna, loss of trees, bushes, water plants, and mangroves, which will eventually lead to water and air pollution. And using this for cargo movement and all will lead to chances of oil spillage, etc. And for large vessels, only one-way traffic is possible. So whether it is economically feasible, we have to think, right? And deepening of canal will lead to groundwater table contamination. Apart from that, recently, Kerala Waterways and Infrastructure Limited, that is QUIL, has proposed this canal, which the state government thought of, like, developing up to 14 meters. They have given a proposal for national waterway to convert it as a national waterway. So the minimum width of canal in that case is to be 32 meters. So from 14 to 32 meters, like, we can guess the gravity of the evacuation and acquisition of land required. And as you know, Kerala is a thickly populated, high density population area. So evacuation of so many families, and I'm also part of it. And apart from that, no detailed project report is so far prepared. So we don't know what is the cost. So few concerns from the people living there are whether is it scientific, is it nature friendly, is it economically feasible, is it sustainable, or it is just a political propaganda, whatever it is. But there is a terror in people. You can imagine one day you are getting a notice, like, asking to evacuate your place, and then how it feels. And it is when, there is a there are alternatives available. At a distance of 2.5 kilometers from the canal, you are having the Arabian Sea. So that selection of that sea route, for that, no acquisition of land is required, no additional bridges or construction or expansion is required. It is least expensive. Obviously, no destruction to flora and fauna also will take place, right? No further pollution will be there. And, the canal which is dying at this stage, they can, reconstruct the side walls wherever required using modern construction methods and remove the silt and waste accumulated in the canal without widening it, are the sustainable options that, people residing besides it are considering. So I feel this as a great opportunity to us, to you people. Let let us think wise, act wise, and support. Extend your support to our people. Like whenever you'll come across the widening of this issue, so maybe you will be a part of it. So let us be sustainable. Thank you for hearing me and our people. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much, IRF, for giving us this opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Zenith, for sharing what's happening and how you all are struggling and resisting against it. So thanks a lot for that sharing. And it's amazing to see that along with that resistance, you're also articulating what possibly could be an alternative. So it's a very, very good approach, and we definitely stand in solidarity with your struggle. So thanks a lot for sharing and also being on time with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
So we will move to our third panelist, Milan Das. Is Milan ji here? Okay, great. So Milan Das is General Secretary of Dakshin Banga Matsyajibi Forum, which was established by eminent leaders of fish workers in early 90s to help develop the collective strength of small-scale fish workers of the southern part of West Bengal. And DMF presently has more than 16,000 members, including fishers, fish farmers, vendors, fish sorters, dryers, and other auxiliary fish workers working in both marine and inland fisheries. And they have reached over 9 districts in West Bengal, and they have been a petitioner challenging the recurring capsizes of fly ash barrages in Indo-Bangladesh protocol, and they will be sharing experiences from there. So Milanji, over to you. Can you hear us? Milanji, you have to unmute. Yeah, okay.
नमस्कार। मैं जो आपको सबको मालूम है जे इधर जो प्रॉब्लम वो पहले ही आबली थोड़ा बोल रही थी, जो हमारा इधर कलकत्ता से जो शिप हुगली नदी हुगली रिवर से वो जाते हैं बांग्लादेश, ये जो रूट है इंडो बांग्लादेश प्रोटोकॉल रूट, ये रूट पे बहुत सारे शिप जाते हैं। मेनली जो वो शिप कैरी करता है वो फ्लाई एश। तो ये सिर्फ फ्लाई एश, कभी कभी ये कुछ तो डूब गया था नदिया में, और इस कारण से जो प्रॉब्लम हो जाते हैं, जो वो जगह वो फ्लाई एश तो पानी के साथ मिक्स हो जाते हैं और वो एरिया में मच्छी नहीं मिलता है। ये एक प्रॉब्लम है। और एक है कि जब तक वो जो शिप जो डूब जाते हैं, जो उनको जब तक नहीं उठाएंगे तब तक उधर वही रहेगा, 1 किलोमीटर तक कोई मछुआरे मछली पकड़ने नहीं जा सकते हैं। ये चल रहा था। और एक जो है प्रॉब्लम ये पहले से ही है, वो है कि जब ये शिप जितने सारे जहाज शिप बढ़ जाएगा चलने के लिए, मछुआरों को प्रॉब्लम हर दिन होता है, क्योंकि उनको जो प्रोपेलर है, प्रोपेलर में हमारा नेट, मछुआरों को नेट अटक जाते हैं, नष्ट हो जाते हैं। एक नेट नष्ट हो जाते हैं मतलब उसको 25,000 रुपया नष्ट हो गया। आज तक कोई क्या हुआ जी, इतने सारे नेट नष्ट हुआ, उसी का कोई हिसाब नहीं है किसी के पास, सरकार के पास नहीं है। मछुआरे लोगों तो पहले से जानता ही नहीं था जो इसको प्रोटेस्ट कर सकते हैं। तो कुछ डेवलपमेंट हुआ है, क्योंकि 3-4 साल हम लोग इसके एग्नेस्ट में काम कर रहा है। पहले से भी बहुत चिट्ठी भी गवर्नमेंट को दिया, पोस्ट को दिया, सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट को दिया। इसी कारण से जब ये शिप डूब रहे थे तो अभी जो सिचुएशन ऐसे हुआ तो हम लोग प्रोटेस्ट किया, वो एनजीटी में भी केस हुआ और वो डेपुटेशन भी हमारा हल्दिया पोर्ट अथॉरिटी को की दिया। तो इस कारण से और फ्रीक्वेंटली हम लोग चिट्ठी लिखा जी ये प्रॉब्लम हो रहा है। हाँ, ये देखिए ये जो स्ट्रेच मैं बोल रहा हूँ इधर से आपको कलकत्ता से सुंदरबन तक, ये सिर्फ हुगली रिवर तो इतना बड़ा नहीं है, हुगली रिवर नामखाना तक खत्म हो जाता है, उसके बाद और कुछ रिवर है। ये जो हुगली रिवर जितना है उसमें 5,000 से ज्यादा मछुआरों नाव मछली पकड़ते हैं उधर। इसके मतलब 25,000 मछुआरों मछली पकड़ते हैं। जब कोई शिप डूब जाते हैं तब क्या होता है, वो एरिया में कम से कम 2-3 हजार लोगों का काम चले जाते हैं। तो ये प्रॉब्लम चल रहा है बहुत दिन से। तो इसके हम लोग चिट्ठी लिखा। इस अभी जो सिचुएशन है क्या हुआ, जैसे जब लास्ट जो हमारा इधर डूब गया था वो तारीख था तारीख के कुछ लास्ट 21 साल में अक्टूबर में 19 अक्टूबर 2001 में लास्ट जो हमारा हुगली रिवर में जहाज डूब गया था, उसके बाद अभी तक नहीं हुआ। इसी का अंदर में कुछ ये हुआ क्या, हम लोग जब डेपुटेशन देने के लिए गया हल्दिया पोर्ट अथॉरिटी से, उस टाइम में एक ड्रेजर वो हुगली रिवर में था। तो वो क्या उस कारण से बहुत सारे मछुआरों मछली पकड़ नहीं जा पा रहा था, तो हम लोग डेपुटेशन के बाद वो उसको हटा दिया उधर से। ये एक है। और एक है एनजीटी में जो हम लोग केस किया, उस मामला किया, उस कारण से एनजीटी का ऑर्डर आया और वो फोर मेंबर का एक कमेटी बनाया इन्वेस्टिगेशन करने के लिए। एक कोर्ट का ऑर्डर है एनजीटी का। जैसे ये सिचुएशन क्या है, वो जो जहाज डूबने के लिए क्या इम्पैक्ट हुआ है, मछुआरों को क्या प्रॉब्लम है, ये सब कुछ उनको कमेटी को रिपोर्ट बनाने के लिए बोला। तो एक है। और एक जो है हमारा इधर मछुआरों जो है वो अभी कॉन्शियस हो गया, क्योंकि पहले उन लोगों को कोई जानकारी ही नहीं था जो ये लोग कोई बदमाशी करे, इसको किसी किसी जगह जाके हम लोग उसका एग्नेस्ट में कंप्लेन दर्ज करें, पहले उनको पता नहीं था। तो हम लोग जब संगठन से काम शुरू किया, अभी वो उन लोगों को साइकोलॉजिकली मेंटली वो लोग थोड़ा सा स्ट्रांग हो गया। जो हम लोगों को कोई प्रॉब्लम हो जाए हम लोग पोर्ट ट्रस्ट के पास चिट्ठी लिखेंगे, क्या सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के पास चिट्ठी लिखेंगे। तो ऐसे तो हुआ कुछ दिन पहले। और एक ये इधर हमारा घोड़ामारा आइलैंड बोल के है, आप लोग देख पाएंगे गूगल मैप में, उधर एक क्या हो गया, एक शिप वो बांग्लादेश वाला था, वो जा रहे थे, लेकिन उनका जो नेविगेशन चैनल, तब ज्यादा से ज्यादा शिप ऐसे होता है वो अपना नेविगेशन चैनल छोड़ के घुस जाते हैं और जगह जहां पर मछुआरे लोग मछली पकड़ते हैं, तो उसको नेट नष्ट कर देते हैं। तो उसी एक नेट को एक मछुआरों का नेट नष्ट कर दिया था। और उधर का जितने सारे नाव था, तो वो लोग हमको पूछा फोन में, जे दादा क्या करूं, पहले से उनको बोला था एक दिन एक काम करो उसको घेर लो, तो वो लोग वही कर दिया। पूरा आपको न्यूज में हुआ है, जो पूरा जहाज का शिप को अटक दिया उधर। उसके बाद वो कॉम्पेंसेशन मांगा एवं लास्ट तक उनको कॉम्पेंसेशन देना ही पड़ा, 30,000 रुपया कॉम्पेंसेशन दे के तब उनको वो छाड़ मिला। तो ये अभी। और एक है कि अभी मछुआरा लोगों का इसी का स्टेप का कारण से अभी थोड़ा देख रहा है, जो अभी ये जो टूटने का, नेट नष्ट होने का और डूबने का ये कम हो रहा है। तो एक है कि ये जो शिप चल रहा है ना इधर इंडो बांग्लादेश, ये शिप का बहुत पुराना का ओल्ड शिप है। ये कई तरह से टूट जाते हैं। तो हमको लग रहा है इसमें कोई दुष्ट चक्र भी है, जो इंश्योरेंस कंपनी के साथ इनको कोई चक्कर है। जैसे शिप डूब जाए तो उसके बाद इंश्योरेंस कंपनी से पैसा मिल जाएगा, ऐसे हम लोगों को लगा, क्योंकि ये शिप सीवर्दी नहीं है। अब देखेंगे तो ये शिप अच्छा वाला नहीं है, पुराना शिप को इस काम पे लगाते हैं। तो ये प्रॉब्लम इधर है। तो हम लोग चाहते हैं, सुंदरबन में तो बहुत प्रॉब्लम हो रहा है, ये शिप चलता है उधर भी नेट को नष्ट करते हैं, ये प्रॉब्लम है हमारा इधर। अभी जब इनलैंड वाटरवेज जो डिक्लेयर कर दिया, उसी कारण से प्रॉब्लम और बढ़ जाएगा, क्योंकि जो शिप अभी चल रहा है उसमें हमारा मछुआरों का मछली पकड़ने का नेट को जो कास्टिंग करेंगे उसमें जगह नहीं मिल रहा है। इसके बाद जब ज्यादा शिप बढ़ जाएगा तो क्या होगा, ये लोगों को नेट फेंकने के लिए जगह नहीं रहेंगे। हाँ, तो ये जो लोग है, आप सिर्फ सुंदरबन को छोड़िए, सुंदरबन में 1 लाख मछुआरों है, और इधर सिर्फ हुगली रिवर जो सुंदरबन का पार्ट नहीं है, तो उसमें अभी जो हिसाब है वो 25,000 से मछुआरे पकड़ते हैं और एक फैमिली में डिपेंड 5 लोग को धरे तो 1,25,000 लोगों का आजीविका है उसका पर। तो वो लोग वो जाने वाला है। हाँ, और पॉल्यूशन तो बहुत है। पॉल्यूशन क्योंकि हमारा जो कलकत्ता सिटी है इधर होल्डे है, उसके जितने सारे पॉल्यूशन, इंडस्ट्री का पॉल्यूशन उधर फेंक रहा है, इसी कारण से मछली भी कम हो रहा है। और एक प्रॉब्लम है, देखिए हिल्सा सैंक्चुअरी डिक्लेयर कर दिया वो अगला 7-8 साल से, वो फराक्का से शुरू करके इधर हमारा गंगा सागर तक। देखिए वो लोग हिल्सा बचाने चाहते हैं, लेकिन वो लोग क्या बोलते हैं, हम लोगों को विलन बना दिया। बोले कि ये मछुआरों लोगों के कारण से हिल्सा नहीं बच रहा है, वो लोग को पहले उधर से हटाओ तो मछली बच जाएगी। लेकिन ये जो पॉल्यूशन हो रहा है, ये जो शिप चलने के कारण जो साउंड पॉल्यूशन हो रहा है, उसको जो पेट्रोल गिर रहा है, इसको कोई, मैंने गवर्नमेंट का जो कंसल्टेशन 1-2 हुआ था इसी का बारे में, मैंने ये क्वेश्चन किया था, तो वो बोला फिशरी डिपार्टमेंट का ऑफिसर, नहीं नहीं ये हम लोगों का डिपार्टमेंट का नहीं है, आप जो क्वेश्चन उठा रहा है। इसका मतलब है वो चुप रहने चाहते हैं। लेकिन ये जो सच है, ये सच को कोई नहीं ले आते हैं सामने। लेकिन जो झूठा है, जो हिंसा को बचाएंगे तो मछुआरों को उधर से भगाओ, ये है ये लोगों का तरीका। हाँ, तो ये प्रॉब्लम। लेकिन हम लोग बोल दिया जी हम लोगों को तो पेट का सवाल है, आप क्यों हिंसा नहीं आ रहा है, पहले वो देखिए। पहले देखिए कितने शिप चल रहा है, अभी जो इनलैंड वाटर हो जाएगा कितने शिप आएगा। हाँ, तो उसमें क्या प्रॉब्लम होगा, तो उस प्रॉब्लम में मछुआरों आजीविका को जाएगा। गवर्नमेंट को एक हो गया कि भाई हमारा ये जब शिप ज्यादा चलेंगे हमारा इनकम ज्यादा होगा। लेकिन 1.5-2 लाख लोगों को इनकम जाएगा, ये सरकार सोचते नहीं है। कितना पैसा आएगा वो सोचता है, लेकिन कितना लोगों का काम जाएगा ये नहीं सोचता है। प्रॉब्लम यही है। मैं इधर खत्म करता हूँ। थैंक यू।
थैंक यू मिलान जी, आपने जो जमीनी हकीकत शेयर की है उसके लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। और ये आपने जो लास्ट बात कही वो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट थी कि सरकार ये नहीं सोचती कि 1,25,000 लोगों की आजीविका जाएगी, पर ये सोचते हैं कि कितना पैसा आएगा। वो पैसा किन के पास जा रहा है, वो आम लोगों के पास नहीं जा रहा है, वो कॉर्पोरेशंस और बड़ी इंडस्ट्रीज के पास जा रहा है। तो बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया अपनी जमीनी हकीकत शेयर करने के लिए। मैं अवली से रिक्वेस्ट,
अच्छा, और एक है कि हमारा प्रेसिडेंट देवाशीष वो मीटिंग में ज्वाइन करने चाहते थे, लेकिन उनको लिंक नहीं मिला।
शायद किसी कारणवश नहीं हुआ होगा,
हाँ।
बट आई होप कि वो अटेंडीज में एटलीस्ट ज्वाइन कर पाए, या हम उनको अभी भेज देंगे लिंक किसी तरीके से। सॉरी उसके लिए।
नहीं, ठीक है।
आपकी जो आपने बात रखी वो अवली थोड़ा संक्षिप्त में इंग्लिश में ट्रांसलेट कर देंगे। अवली, कैन यू प्लीज?
Thank you, Melinda. Thanks, Srishti. I'll quickly try to summarize this. So what Melinda was saying was that many ships from Kolkata many ships are there which mainly transport fly ash from Kolkata to Bangladesh. And when these recurring sort of incidents happen, where many fly ash barges capsized in the Indo-Bangladesh protocol route, he was explaining how the fish population got affected. And not only that, after this incident there was around there was a restriction for the fishermen to access that area. There was a restriction of around 1 kilometer. In that region, fishing in that region could not be done till the barge was salvaged. He also talked about how they have written to the authorities. They have also sent petitions to various authorities. They're also petitioner in the National Green Tribunal, wherein they have questioned the capsizing of these barges. And he was discussing how around 25,000 fishermen are dependent when these barge incidents took place. And no, he gave the example that if 25,000 of the fishermen are dependent on a river stretch, then when this sort of barge capsizes, it leads to the loss of livelihood of around 3,000 fishermen. So that's what he was trying to explain. And he also said that along with all of these barge capsize accidents, actually the movement of barges on the river leads to destruction of fishing. Not only that, the fishing nets are destroyed, and this also leads to a restriction on fishing. He also talked about how the last barge that capsized, I think he confused the date, it was around 19th October 2021. And he also talked about how after this petition is filed in the NGT, and because of the actions that the DMF is taking, many fishermen are feeling now empowered to ask for compensation, etc.
Last date was 3rd November 2021.
3rd November 2021.
Uh.
That was the last incident of barge capsize on the fly ash barge capsize incident in the Indo-Bangladesh protocol route. So he was also saying that now with the interventions done by the Dakshin Banga Matsyajeebi Forum, fisher folks are now conscious. They know that these impacts, because of these impacts, they should be compensated, and they have started asking for compensation. He also sort of mentioned that it could be possible that because these barges are not seaworthy and these are old barges, so in the interest of getting compensation from the insurance company, these barges are getting capsized. And he also mentioned about how as the ships or the traffic of ships increase in the river, there might not be any river, there might not be any space left in the river to fish. And he also gave an example of how a ban on Hilsa sanctuary is mainly to protect fish, mainly to protect the Hilsa. But actually, they are restricted to fish in that region because of that ban. But actually, the pollution which is caused due to the ships, whether in the form of noise or fuel oil leakage, etc., these sort of impacts also sort of adversely impact the fish population in the Hilsa. So these sort of things are not taken into account. And the government, he was saying, is thinking only in terms of economics, and that too for some people, and not for the livelihood of many fishers. I think I'll end here.
Compensation के लिए एक हम लोग मूवमेंट किए थे, वो एक शिप को घेर लिए थे, उसको पास 30,000 रुपया हम लोग वो लोगों के पास कंपेंसेशन अदाई किया लास्ट तक.
हाँ, so they did a movement, so they mainly
वो उनका नेविगेशन चैनल छोड़ के हमारा एक मछुआरों का नेट नष्ट कर दिया था कुछ दिन पहले.
Right. So a ship once entered the space which was not the navigation channel, designated navigation channel, and it entered the space where fishing nets were casted. And because of the movement done by DMF, they got the compensation.
Thank you, Milan ji, फिर से, and Avli for that very comprehensive summary. I think you covered all the points. So we'll move to our next panelist, Bhairam Sahani. Bhairam Sahani ji is a former Sarpanch of Tahirpur village, where land acquisition is ongoing for the World Bank funded freight village and for the expansion of multi-modal terminal in Varanasi. Both these projects are direct ancillary infrastructure projects of the National Waterway. So again, Bhairam ji will be sharing their experiences from their region. Bhairam ji, आप हमें सुन सकते हैं?
जी सुन रहे हैं. आप सभी को नमस्ते. मेरी आवाज जा रही है?
जी अच्छे से आ रही है, आप शुरू कर सकते हैं.
आप सभी को नमस्ते. IRF के आज प्रोग्राम में आप सभी का धन्यवाद देते हैं कि हमारे जैसे लोगों को आप लोगों ने शामिल किया. मेरे यहाँ सबसे बड़ी समस्या जो इस समय आ गई है, मेरे यहाँ प्रधानमंत्री जी का ड्रीम प्रोजेक्ट एक मल्टी मॉडल टर्मिनल पास हुआ है, जो वाराणसी परिक्षेत्र में रामनगर में बन रहा है. लगभग 100 एकड़ के भूमि का उनको आवश्यकता है, जिसमें 3055 करोड़ रुपए खर्च होने का उन्होंने अनुमान अपना लगाया है. लेकिन यहाँ पे इस प्रोजेक्ट को लाने से पहले कभी इन लोगों ने इसकी सामाजिक संरक्षण नहीं कराया, ना ही इसके होने वाले खामियों को देखा, और ना ही इस पे कभी विचार किया गया कि इससे प्रभावित होने वाले लोगों को क्या हम रोजगार देंगे। जैसे ये हल्दिया से लेके इलाहाबाद तक का इन लोगों का प्रोग्राम है, ये टर्मिनल बनाने का। हल्दिया से लेके जब वाराणसी होते हुए इलाहाबाद जाएगा इनकी जहाज, उसमें कितने मछुआरे प्रभावित होंगे, शायद इनका आकलन इन्होंने नहीं किया, और मेरे ख्याल से करना चाहिए था। अगर कर लिए हैं तो उनके लिए क्या व्यवस्था करेंगे, कैसे उनके आजीविका का ध्यान रखेंगे, वो कैसे जिएंगे, कैसे खाएंगे, भविष्य में उनके रहने की व्यवस्थाएं क्या रहेगी। क्योंकि यहाँ पे जब ये टर्मिनल बनाएंगे, टर्मिनल बन चुका है तो कुछ जमीनें ये अफ्रेड विलेज के नाम पे लेना चाह रहे हैं। पहले तो टर्मिनल बनाने का इन्होंने शुरुआत किया, अब इनको 100 एकड़ फ्रेड विलेज के लिए चाहिए, जो कि यहाँ के स्थानीय लोगों को काफी मतलब आए दिन संकट होती रहती है। अधिकारियों द्वारा ये सूचित किया जाता है कि आपको घर छोड़ के जाना होगा। कभी ऐसा लगता है कि जो लोग हैं वो भी भविष्य में चले जाएंगे। ऐसा प्रतीत होने के बाद लोगों को यहाँ पे काफी तकलीफें हो रही हैं और बड़ा दुखित रहते हैं। तो मैं तो यही चाहूंगा कि आपके माध्यम से सरकार को ये सूचित और अवगत कराया जाए कि ये रामनगर हमारा जो गांव पड़ता है, ये मिल्कीपुर पड़ता है, जो चंदौली जिले में है। मिल्कीपुर ताहीपुर में 100 एकड़ इन्होंने जमीन लेने का प्रस्ताव बनाया है, जो फ्रेड विलेज बनाएंगे। तो मेरा तो ये रिक्वेस्ट है कि यहाँ पे जो लोग हैं, अगर इनको यहाँ से विस्थापित कर दिया जाएगा तो इनकी आजीविका का जो साधन है वो खत्म हो जाएगा, क्योंकि आजीविका का सबसे बड़ा साधन गंगा नदी, और यहाँ बगल में सटे हुए बनारस की वजह से इन लोगों को रोजी रोजगार का काम मिल जाता है छोटा मोटा। सारे लोग मध्यम श्रेणी के परिवार के हैं। और सबसे बड़ी समस्या और आ जाएगी, यहाँ पे हम लोगों को जो सुविधाएं हैं शिक्षा का, स्वास्थ्य का, वो उससे वंचित हो जाएंगे। हम लोग 3 किलोमीटर की दूरी पे जाने के बाद हम लोगों को अच्छे हॉस्पिटल मिल जाते हैं। 7 किलोमीटर पर यहाँ से BHU यूनिवर्सिटी पड़ता है, जहाँ पे शिक्षा और स्वास्थ्य दोनों की व्यवस्था है। तो मेरा तो ये आग्रह है आपके माध्यम से कि इन लोगों को ये अवगत कराया जाए, सरकारी तंत्र को, कि अगर ऐसे जगहों से किसी को विस्थापित किया जाता है तो उनको ऐसे ही सुविधा युक्त जगहों पे विस्थापित किया जाए, जिससे कि ऐसी सुख सुविधा और धार्मिक नगरी हमारी काशी है, माँ गंगा की गोद में हम लोग पले बढ़े हैं और हम लोगों को आज दूर किया जा रहा है। ये सबसे बड़ी तकलीफ की बात है। और मैं तो यही चाहूंगा कि इसमें जितने भी पैनल में जुड़े हुए लोग हैं, इस पर विचार करें और सरकार से बातें करें कि ऐसे जहां भी अधिग्रहण हो रहे हों, यहीं की बात मैं नहीं कर रहा हूँ, हो सकता है कि कहीं और भी ये अधिग्रहण करेंगे जहाँ के लोगों की बहुत सी चीजें नहीं जानकारी होगी। जैसे अभी पश्चिम बंगाल से दास जी बोल रहे थे, उनको बहुत सी चीजें पहले नहीं जानकारी थी, जिसके वजह से उन्होंने वो कदम नहीं उठा पाए। जो कदम उठाए होते तो शायद पहले ही उसका निदान हो गया होता। तो ऐसा होता है, जहाँ पे ये प्रोजेक्ट आते हैं या ये लोग लाते हैं, वहाँ के कुछ ऐसे लोगों को पहले मिला लेते हैं जो कि वहाँ की मुखबिरी करके सही बातों को ढक देता है और गलत बातों को प्रचारित करता है। इनका जहाज आने के लिए यहाँ पे अभी तक कोई 1-2 जहाज भी नहीं आई, या आई होगी तो मैं नहीं बता सकता, लेकिन उसके लिए सामान आया ही नहीं। और रास्ता बनाना इनके लिए कोई अभी आसान काम भी नहीं है। रास्ता बना नहीं, इनको 100 एकड़ की जमीन जरूर चाहिए फ्रेड विलेज बनाने के लिए। ये बात मेरे समझ से परे है, क्योंकि अगर ऐसा है तो पहले अपने रास्ते बनाए, हल्दिया से लेके यहाँ तक बनावे रास्ते। बनारस में नावें नहीं चल पाती हैं, रेती पड़ जाते हैं, रुक जाती हैं, बड़ी बड़ी जहाजें कैसे आएंगी, ये तो समझ से परे है। बनारस में कछुआ सेंचुरी था इसके पहले, और वहां से स्थानांतरण करके जहाजों को लाने के लिए इन्होंने कछुआ सेंचुरी को लगभग 17 किलोमीटर दूर कर दिया। तो मेरे ख्याल से कछुआ सेंचुरी का केवल नाम बदलने से तो कछुआ वहां चले नहीं जाएंगे, क्योंकि कोई ऑफिस और कार्यालय तो है नहीं वहां पे। कछुआ लेडी उस जगह इसलिए रहते हैं क्योंकि वहां कछुआ सेंचुरी इसलिए बनाए गए थे कि मोक्षदायिनी काशी है, वहां पे लाशें इतनी जलती हैं कि उसको जो अधजले लाश होते हैं वो जब गंगा नदी में फेंके जाते हैं, तो कछुआ ऐसे जंतु हैं जो उसको खा के खत्म कर देते हैं और माँ गंगा को साफ रखते हैं। और इन लोगों ने यहाँ से स्थानांतरण करा के 17 किलोमीटर दूर ले गए, तो क्या मैं ये भी जानना चाहूंगा कि क्या कछुआ भी वहां चले गए, और चले गए तो फिर यहाँ गंगा की सफाई कौन करेगा? जो अधजली लाशें निकलेंगी, जो लोग गंगा में फेंकेंगे मुक्ति के लिए, उसकी सफाई कौन करेगा खाके? तो मेरा ये भी रिक्वेस्ट है कि इस पे भी जो पर्यावरणविद हैं, इनका भी ध्यान केंद्रित कराना चाहूंगा कि ऐसे भी चीजों पर ध्यान दें। और बाकी माँ गंगा से जो आस्था के साथ मेरे ख्याल से व्यापार तो नहीं करना चाहिए। अब लोग माँ से भी व्यापार कर रहे हैं, ये मेरे समझ से परे है। तो उन सरकार है, जैसा चाहे वैसा करे, लेकिन लोगों को अगर आप रोजगार देना चाहते हैं, जो यहाँ पे है उसका ख्याल मेरे ख्याल से करना चाहिए, जो नहीं है उसका ख्याल अब जब कर रहे हैं। यहाँ पे बड़ा टर्मिनल बनेगा, यहाँ पे काफी सुविधाएं मिलेंगी, तो जब हम रहेंगे ही नहीं, मेरी जमीनें ले ली जाएंगी, यहाँ के लोगों की जमीनें ले ली जाएंगी, तो वो फिर यहाँ की सुख सुविधाओं को लेंगे कैसे? कितने किलोमीटर दूरी पे ले जाके हम बसा देते हैं, पता नहीं चलता है कि वो परिवार गए कहाँ। यहाँ पे बनारस में हम लोगों का सटा हुआ 100 मीटर का फरलांग की दूरी पर ये जिला है। सर्किल रेट बहुत कम है, बनारस का सर्किल रेट बहुत अधिक है। उसके एवज में यहाँ पे 4 लाख रुपया विश्वा में देने का इन्होंने प्रस्ताव किया है, वो भी 4 गुना करने के बाद, जबकि बाजारू रेट 15 लाख से 20 लाख रुपया विश्वा चल रहा है। ऐसे स्थिति में अगर किसी की 1 बिस्वा आधा बिस्वा जमीन चली गई, तो वो क्या घर बनाएगा और कहाँ जमीन खरीदेगा? तो यहाँ से अगर वो 25-30 किलोमीटर 40 किलोमीटर की दूरी पे जाके अगर रहेगा, तो यहाँ के जारी जो सुविधाएं हैं, या जो फ्रेट विलेज बनने वाले हैं, बंदरगाह बनने वाले हैं, चलिए मैं भी स्वागत करता हूँ, लेकिन मुझे भी तो रोजगार चाहिए, मुझे भी तो उसका लाभ चाहिए। मैं जमीन दे रहा हूँ, मैं उसको अपना जीवन समर्पित कर दे रहा हूँ, मैंने गांव को संवारा, मैंने यहाँ पे रोड नाली सीवर किसी भी उन्हीं के पैसे से मैं बनाया हूँ, लेकिन आज मेरे यहाँ रोड नाली सीवर लाइट सारी व्यवस्थाएं एकदम दुरुस्त हैं। कहीं भी ऐसा नहीं लगता है कि ये गांव कहीं देहात है। यहाँ मात्र 3 किलोमीटर दूरी पे रामनगर शहर है, 7 किलोमीटर दूरी पे BHU है, और बाबा विश्वनाथ जी 10 किलोमीटर दूरी पे है। ऐसे जगह कहाँ हम लोगों को मिलेंगे? या तो मेरी यही निवेदन है आपके माध्यम से कि अगर ऐसे जगहों को विस्थापित किया जाता है किसी भी लोगों को, तो ऐसे ही सुख सुविधा वाले जगहों पे उनको विस्थापित किया जाए। और इसी अनुरोध के साथ हम, अगर समय समाप्त हो रहा हो तो अगर समय हो तो और बोले मैं। हेलो,
आपके पास भाईराम जी 3 मिनट और हैं, तो आप बोल सकते हैं।
मैं यही चाहता हूं, और कुछ मेरे सवाल ऐसे हैं जो आप लोगों से जुड़े हुए हैं कि मैं आपसे भविष्य में क्या मदद ले सकता हूं, क्योंकि हमें पता भी तो होना चाहिए कि हम आपसे मदद क्या ले सकते हैं, हम सरकार से कैसे अपनी बात को शालीनता से रख सकते हैं, क्योंकि बात तो भी रखने हैं, हम कैसे रखेंगे वो हमें शायद तजुर्बे ना हो, हम अपने आक्रोश में रखेंगे, उस बात को और नुकसान होगा, वो मुझे आप सुझाव दें। और लवली जी और इनके सारे दोस्तों को मैं धन्यवाद देता हूं, जो हम लोगों का इन लोगों ने सहयोग किया, ऐसे समय पे काफी लोगों ने गाइडलाइन किया। तो मैं चाहूंगा कि जो भी टीम के पैनलिस्ट हैं और जानकार हैं, हम लोगों के ऐसी समस्याओं पर विचार करते हुए निकट भविष्य में भी हम लोगों को ऐसे जुड़ने का मौका दें या कुछ मार्गदर्शन करें। आप सभी का धन्यवाद।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद भाईराम जी, आपने बहुत बढ़िया बात रखी और बहुत महत्वपूर्ण बात रखी और महत्वपूर्ण सवाल भी उठाए कि सिर्फ लोगों को एक जगह से हटा देना और उनकी जमीन ले लेना सरकार का काम नहीं है, बल्कि पुनर्वास के लिए सरकार क्या योजना बना रही है वो भी बहुत जरूरी है। और सिर्फ इंसानों के पुनर्वास के लिए नहीं, बल्कि जो आप टर्टल्स या कछुए को भी बता रहे हैं, तो उनके पुनर्वास का क्या हो रहा है और वो कहाँ जा रहे हैं और उससे गंगा का क्या इम्पैक्ट हो रहा है। तो आपने बहुत महत्वपूर्ण सवाल उठाए पर्यावरण को लेकर, लोगों की आजीविकाओं को लेकर। तो आपका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। और जी जरूर, जो आपने आखिरी बात कही कि हम आपके कैसे स्ट्रगल में जुड़ सकते हैं या पहुंचा सकते हैं, उस पे भी हम जब क्वेश्चन आंसर्स में पहुंचेंगे तो चर्चा करेंगे। तो हमारे पैनलिस्ट हमारे साथ जुड़ गए, उनके इंटरनेट की थोड़ा वीक था। अरुण जी, मैं अरुण जी आपको इंट्रोड्यूस करती हूँ और फिर आप अपने कमेंट्स रख सकते हैं। तो अरुण शिवकर is an environmental activist from Raigad. He's associated with Savak Pen Prakalp, Raigad, and he will be speaking about the impacts due to barrage movement in Amba waterway, and which contributes to major traffic of goods moved on the national waterways in India. Arun, आपके पास 10 मिनट है. Over to you.
नमस्ते. अलीबाग तहसील में जो काम कर रहे हैं, वहाँ की जो अंबा रिवर है, जिसको हम धर्मतर क्रीक बोलते हैं, वो 42 किलोमीटर ऐसे सुधागढ़ तालुका से यहाँ आती है. उनमें से करीबन 140 से 150 गांव, जिसमें 60,000 फैमिलीज आज है. करीबन उसमें 4,000 मछुआरे हैं जो अपने छोटी बोट या 1 सिलेंडर बोट से अपनी मछुआरी करते हैं. ये धर्मतर क्रीक में आईपीसेल और जेएसडब्ल्यू जैसे 2 कंपनियां हैं, जिसमें ज्यादा से तौर पे जेएसडब्ल्यू का हमें काफी तकलीफ हो रही है. जेएसडब्ल्यू कंपनी जो धर्मतर क्रीक जहां है, जो डीप फिश से यानी धर्मतर अपना रेवस से लेके 19 किलोमीटर अंदर आती है, जो 8 या 10,000 टन का बार्जेस अंदर आता है. ये जो खाड़ी क्षेत्र है, जो खाड़ी की चौड़ाई है वो 2,250 मीटर है, और एक्चुअली गवर्नमेंट ने 135 नेविगेशन चैनल उनको दिए है. खाड़ी का चौड़ाई देख के और 135 नेविगेशन चैनल का देख के इतना बुरा असर होता है ये खाड़ी में, उसमें से पूरे मछुआरों को काफी असर हो रहा है. अभी ये जो बार्जेस आ रहे हैं बड़े बड़े 8,000 या 10,000 टन के, उसमें से जो ये जो बार्जेस का जो लहर आता है, वेव जो आते हैं, उसी कारण सी कल्चर और मरीन कल्चर पूरे खत्म हो रहे हैं. मच्छी का बहुत बुरा असर हो रहा है. ये बार्जेस के वजह से ये किनारे पे जो बंड्स है, ये किनारे के बंड्स के जो खेती की रक्षा के लिए जो बंड्स बनाए हैं, वो बंड्स के अंदर काफी एकड़ क्षेत्र है, जिसमें जैसे हम बोलते हैं कि 60 या 70 हजार एकड़ हमारी लैंड है जो किसान है हमारे, उसमें खारा पानी यानी सलाइन वाटर जो अंदर आ रहा है और काफी उसका असर रहता है. यानी जैसे कि मछुआरों को भी असर हो रहा है और किसानों को भी असर हो रहा है. और इसके लिए अभी उसमें करीबन जो कुछ गांव है ऐसे कि वो गांव में तो पूरा उनका लाइवलीहुड ही खत्म हुआ है. तीसरी बात, ये बार्जेस की वजह से उन्होंने जो ड्रेजिंग की है, वो ड्रेजिंग की वजह से डिप जो हो जाने की वजह से अभी करंट बढ़ रहा है. वो खाड़ी क्षेत्र में करंट बढ़ने के कारण जो पानी का फ्लो बहुत फास्ट हो रहा है, ताकि वो समुद्र के किनारे खाड़ी क्षेत्र में जो अपने खेती की रक्षा के लिए जो बंड्स बनाए है, वो बंड्स के ऊपर असर होके करीबन अब पूरे बंड्स टूट रहे और खारा पानी अंदर आ रहा है. और यहाँ ऐसा है कि एक बार खारा पानी अंदर आने के बाद 3 साल अनाज नहीं आता है. ये बड़ी बात है. अभी दूसरी बात, ये मैंग्रोव, ये जो बार्जेस आ रहे हैं, वो बार्जेस का वजह से अपना जो मिट्टी निकल रही है, वो मिट्टी निकलने के कारण जो नेचुरली जो कुछ मच्छी रहने की जगह है, मच्छी की रहने की जगह वो पूरी बुझ रही है, और बुझ रहने के कारण उनका जो क्रॉप नहीं बढ़ रहा है. तीसरी बात, जो मैंग्रोव यहाँ है, वो मैंग्रोव हर साल करीबन 200 या 300 मैंग्रोव हर साल पानी में जा रहे हैं. और पानी में जाने की वजह से यहाँ के मच्छी का जो मच्छी का रहने का जगह या उनका अपना एक मिनट, अब उनका जो रहने का जगह उस तो वैसे ही उनको रिवाज है, जैसे कि पैदा करने वाली जो है मच्छी और पैदाश होती है ना, वो भी जगह पूरी नष्ट होती है. ऐसे ही पूरी हालत होने के कारण ये जो है अभी यहाँ मछुआरे जैसे कि जेएसडब्ल्यू अभी क्या कर रहे हैं कि उनका कंपनी का गर्म पानी वो पूरे बार्जे अंदर डाल रही है. बार्जेस की वजह से उसमें वो जो कोयला रहा है, गंधक ला रहे हैं, वो भी पानी में जा रहा है. उसका भी असर आज पूरे एरिया में हो रहा है. यानी पूरे 19 किलोमीटर में जितने भी हमारे मछुआरे हैं, उनके ऊपर असर हो रहा है. इतना कि नहीं तो बल्कि जो करंट बढ़ने की वजह से उसकी और भी ऊपर की तरह ये जो बंड टूट रहे हैं, ताकि ये करीबन आज ऐसी पोजीशन है कि 10 या 10,000 एकड़ तक खारा पानी खेती में घुस रहा है. यानी इसका ये जो JSW का असर सिर्फ मछुआरों के ऊपर ही नहीं हो रहा है, बल्कि किसानों के ऊपर भी हो रहा है, और मैंग्रोव टूट रहे हैं। ये सब करने की वजह से अभी काफी नुकसान हो रहा है। अभी यही JSW कंपनी MIDC थ्रू यहाँ की लैंड लेना चाहते हैं। अब ये लैंड क्यों लेना चाहते हैं? क्योंकि अभी किसानों के उनको बढ़ाने का है उनका प्रोजेक्ट बढ़ाने के कारण कम दाम में MIDC थ्रू उनका जमीन लेने का तय है। इसके ऊपर भी हमारा आंदोलन शुरू है, हम देना नहीं चाहते। उसके लिए हमने अभी एक तय किया है कि JSW को EIA रिपोर्ट जिन्होंने दिया है उनके ऊपर हम लोग केस कर रहे हैं वो कोर्ट में, क्योंकि CWPRS पुणे जो एक संस्था है, उन्होंने जो कुछ दिया उनको उसको चैलेंज करने का हमको, कि पानी के लिए पानी का जो पर्यावरण के बारे में जो स्टडी करने वाली जो संस्था है, उन्होंने कौन से ढंग से उनको दिया है, उसके लिए भी हम लोग चैलेंज कर रहे हैं। ऐसा ही बात उरण क्षेत्र में हम लोग लड़ाई शुरू है। वहाँ के वो गवर्नमेंट की 4 कंपनी है, उसके खिलाफ हमारा आंदोलन है। अभी हम लोग NGT कोर्ट में केस जीते है, और अभी यही को सुप्रीम कोर्ट तक कुछ केसेस चल रही है। तो इसके लिए वहाँ के मछुआरों के साथ भी हमारे आंदोलन शुरू है। बस, थैंक यू।
थैंक यू अरुण जी। काफी जमीनी सच्चाई और स्ट्रगल के बारे में शेयर किया, तो थैंक्स अ। मैं संक्षिप्त में चाहूंगी कि अवली, भाईराम जी और अरुण जी की दोनों इंटरवेंशंस को इंग्लिश में बोले। तो आई वेलकम अवली टू जस्ट समराइज व्हाट भाईराम जी एंड अरुण जी हैव सेड इन इंग्लिश, एंड देन वी मूव टू क्वेश्चन एंड आंसर्स।
Okay. I don't think I can do justice to how they have articulated everything, but I'm trying. So Bhairam Sani ji talked mainly about the multimodal terminal and the freight village, which is proposed on the Jalmarg Vikas project on the National Waterway 1. And he gave details of the project of how of around 355 crores he was saying is going to be spent to build the freight village, and around 100 acres of land is now required to build this, and they have gotten the notice for the land which is going to be acquired in the village. He was saying that the social impact assessment is not done for all these interventions, and also impacts are not assessed, and if they're assessed, they're not shared with them. And he was also asking that when such kind of infrastructure is built and they're asked to vacate, and they've been asked to move away from their villages, what alternate livelihoods are there, and which are going to be proposed, because all their livelihood is related to river. He is from Milkipur, where the freight village is to be built, and he was saying that their livelihood is lost, and everyone is from a middle income sort of families, and everything that they do is connected to the river. So if the people are rehabilitated, then they should be resettled in places which have similar sort of facilities, and with the same sort of cultural and spiritual sort of value. He articulated in a much better way than I'm doing this, but yeah, mainly he talked about also the Kachwa century, and he mainly said that now that the turtles are shifted, who will take the place of the ecological functions, the services that they were providing. And also he was talking about you should think about the people when their land is taken from them, and development is done here from so how will this sort of facility benefit them. And he also talked about the circle rates, the correct sort of compensation which should be given to the farmers when the land is taken from them. And he was also he also gave a description of the village and how close it is to different sort of facilities, be it hospitals, be it educational institutions, be it the temples. And he was talking about And he also asked what sort of suggestions we can provide to him so that they can put these concerns to the relevant authorities. Arun Shivkarji mainly talked about the Amba River. He said that Amba River mainly, he was talking about the Dharamtar Creek, where mainly the barges for JSW, he said, are transporting coal. And because of these barges, there is a lot of pollution which is affecting the fish population in that area. And he also talked about how saltwater intrusion, because of the dredges, because of movement of barges, and how it impacts the bunds which are created and the fields, and how the saltwater intrusion impacts the fishing as well as agriculture. He noted it's important that he noted that once the saltwater intrudes in their field, crop cannot be cultivated for around 3 years in that farm. And he was also talking about how dredging increases this sort of saltwater intrusion, and the impact, because mostly coal is transported in this region. So he was also talking about how, because of this transportation, coal also leaks into the water and it impacts the riverine ecology. He was also talking about how he was also questioning, and their organization have challenged the EIA, which is for which CWPRS has done the study of the impacts on the water, on the rivers and water sources. And they were challenging that what kind of assessment they have done that these sort of impacts are seen in this area. And they have filed many petitions with the fishers in the NGT and the Supreme Court. Yeah, I've not covered everything, but this is the gist of it.
Yeah, no, thanks, Avli. Quite comprehensive. Most important points are covered. So thank you. So thanks, first of all, to all our panelists for sharing their insights, their experience. Really heartfelt thank you. तो बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया अपनी एक्सपीरियंसेस शेयर करने के लिए, अपने ज़मीनी स्ट्रगल्स के बारे में के लिए काफी हमने सीखा है. अब हम थोड़ा सवाल जवाब की ओर बढ़ेंगे. We will go to question and answers, and we'll try to pick up some from the chat box. Some of them have already been answered, but maybe if not everybody is able to read in the chat box, it will be that we also speak up a little about these questions. But I first wanted to start with Nachiket. There have been some questions that have responded to. So I was wondering whether after listening to other panelists also you want to share some, and also in sense of the question you have answered, would you like to also bring it up to the rest of the group? Can you hear us? Yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, I think I'm just going to, I think I'll speak in Hindi, for the benefit of all of us. मैं सिर्फ ये कहना चाहूँगा जो कई सारे सवाल पूछे गए, और उन सवालों में कुछ सवाल थे कि जो पशु पक्षियों पे या अन्य जैव विविधता पर जो इसका जो प्रभाव पड़ रहा है उसको कैसे उसका निरोध किया जाए या उसको कैसे किस तरह से कम किया जाए, इसके बारे में कुछ सवाल थे. और कुछ सवाल थे कि क्या अलग किया जा सकता है जिससे कि वाटरवेज, ये जो जहाज वगैरह चलने का जो है वो बना रहे. तो जैसे कि क्या बाधाएं इसमें आ रही है, जैसे कि मछली मारने वाले लोगों की वजह से वाटरवेज के लिए, इस तरह के भी कुछ सवाल थे. मैं केवल ये कहना चाहूंगा कि हम लोगों को ये सोचने की जरूरत है कि असली जरूरतें जो समाज को इस तरह के प्रोजेक्ट से मिलनी चाहिए, क्या वो मिल रही है. क्या इंडस्ट्री भी समाज के लिए जरूरी है, लेकिन क्या रोज की जिंदगी में जिन बेनिफिट्स की हम अपेक्षा करते हैं, क्या वैसी बेनिफिट्स, वैसी सुविधाएं वाटरवेज जैसी प्रोजेक्ट से हमको मिल रही है. और सारे पैनलिस्ट के बातों से भी ये स्पष्ट होता है कि इसकी बेनिफिट जो भी हो बड़े पैमाने पर, उसकी हानि भुगतनी पड़ रही है वहां के स्थानीय लोगों को और जीव जंतुओं को। तो क्या इस तरह का विकास हमको चाहिए? और मैं जस्ट इसको जो है संक्षिप्त में कहने के लिए इतना ही कहना चाहूंगा कि जब तक हम बेसिक पर्यावरण और वहां के स्थानीय लोगों के बारे में इस सोच की शुरुआत नहीं करते हैं, तब तक बाकी सब चीजें मेरे हिसाब से उसके बारे में ज्यादा विचार विमर्श करना सही नहीं होगा। जब तक हम आमूलाग्र जरूरतों का, चाहे वो पर्यावरणीय जरूरतें हो या स्थानीय लोगों की हो, जब तक हम उनका पहले विचार नहीं करते, आगे की कोई बात करना मेरे हिसाब से सही नहीं होता है। बस मैं इतना ही इसमें कहना चाहूंगा। धन्यवाद।
Thank you, Nachiket ji. So Nachiket ji was mentioning some important points, especially regarding that we should think about whether something like this is actually benefiting people and people's livelihood, or just, just basically ignoring all of that. So we have to look over the impacts of local environment and local livelihoods and ask the question for ourselves whether we need this kind of development. So until unless we ask that question and do that thinking around if people's basic necessities are being ensured, or in fact actually because of such projects being severely impacted, so do we need this kind of? So a very important and a pertinent question to ask for most of the development and extractive industry projects today's time. Thank you, Nachiket ji. So किसी और पैनलिस्ट का इस पे कोई प्रतिक्रिया है? Any other panelist also wants to intervene here? Yes, अरुण जी, आपको कुछ कहना है?
अभी जो इन्होंने कुछ क्वेश्चन किए है ना, मेरा ये सुझाव कि JSW जो हमारे यहाँ के हैं उनको पर्याय है, जैसे कि कन्वेयर बेल्ट के सहारे वो लोग कंपनी तक उनका माल लेके जा सकते हैं। दूसरी बात, उन्होंने वही फैक्ट्री में रेल की सुविधा बनाई है और रेल से वो लोग अपना माल हर जगह पहुंच रहे हैं। अब ये बार्जेस से लाने से पहले वो कन्वेयर बेल्ट से अगर उनका जो कुछ भी आया है मटेरियल है वो अब फैक्ट्री तक ला सकते हैं, और जो फैक्ट्री से तैयार हुआ माल वो रेल से बाहर लेके जा सकते हैं, ताकि उससे कारण वो बार्जेस अगर बंद रहेंगे तो उसका कुछ नुकसान नहीं हो रहा है, बल्कि किसानों का नुकसान, जो होने वाला नुकसान ये बच जाएगा, मछुआरों का नुकसान बच जाएगा, सी कल्चर मरीन कल्चर वो बच जाएगा, और समुद्र से अंदर आने वाला मच्छी जो यहाँ पैदाश ही होती है वो पैदाश बढ़ जाएंगी। आज वो समुद्र में मच्छी क्यों कम हो रही है, उसका कारण ये भी है, खाड़ी क्षेत्र में आते हैं और वो पेट सफा करके मच्छी निकल जाती है ताकि वो बढ़ती है मच्छी, तो ये भी कारण रहेगा। तो उनके लिए यही हमारा सुझाव है, अगर पर्याय है, फैक्ट्री तो बंद नहीं होनी चाहिए, विकास भी चाहिए, लेकिन विकास के साथ अगर लोगों में कुछ मुसीबतें है तो मुसीबतें भी नहीं चाहिए, इसलिए ये पर्याय हम भी है। अगर पर्याय है तो वो किया है उन्होंने, जैसे कि उनका जो जेटी है, जेटी से वो लोग अंदर तक 1.5 किलोमीटर वो कन्वेयर बेल्ट से अगर अपना फैक्ट्री में लेके जाते हैं, तो जहां से वो लोग लाते हैं वहां तक कन्वेयर बेल्ट बनाओ ना। वो कन्वेयर बेल्ट बनाने से कारण नीचे कन्वेयर बेल्ट के नीचे जो आउट बंड्स है, जो खेती की रक्षा करने वाले बंड्स है, वो भी अच्छी तरह से रहेंगे, खेती भी बच जाएगी। ये हमारा सुझाव है। फैक्ट्री भी बंद नहीं होनी चाहिए, लेकिन लोगों को भी सुविधा होनी चाहिए।
जी जरूर। फैक्ट्री के साथ साथ लोगों की आजीविका का बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट है। अगर लोगों की आजीविका के बारे में नहीं होगा तो फिर वो और ज्यादा बड़ी प्रॉब्लम्स करेगा। तो थैंक यू अरुण जी। किसी और पैनलिस्ट का कोई प्रतिक्रिया है? एनी अदर पैनलिस्ट वांट्स टू से समथिंग ऑन दिस? If not, then there were more direct questions, which I think Dr. Eric has answered, but it would be good, Dr. Eric, if you could also answer here right now, which Himanshu ji had asked you. But in general, you must be hearing these comments. So if you have further thoughts on any of these things, we would love to hear them.
Yes, I have tried to answer questions in the Q&A section. And would you like me to read them aloud, or?
It would be good in case some people are not able to read the Q&A. And in
general, then let me see. There was a question on the impacts of the development of river navigation in Europe and the United States on traditional users of water, and also who are all included in the traditional users. And second part of the question was, did the users face the kind of siltation issues that Indian rivers face, and how did they tackle these silt issues? And then I answered that river training by narrowing the low water channel, by cutting off bands and closing secondary channels, was the major type of interventions for navigability of the River Rhine in the Netherlands and Germany. And that was basically an intervention that reduced the siltation that the questioner was referring to. These interventions often were not primarily done for navigation, that was multi-objective, and often it was primarily done for land reclamation, for agriculture, also to eradicate malaria, and to prevent ice jams. And that means that farmers and also ships, the shipping part of the traditional users basically benefited. And I don't know whether the improvement of navigation had effects on fisheries and brick industry. And these sectors of society have been affected, but there were also other stressors in parallel. There was pollution. There was also the improvement of safety against flooding. So the construction of embankments, which sometimes involved the demolition of houses. And I find it very difficult to see whether that had a component for navigation as well. The only thing is that the long-term effects that were not understood originally, they manifested themselves only after 50 or 100 years or 150. And that had many effects on different parts of society, and I mentioned those in the presentation. So the lowering of water tables has effects on agriculture, but also on nature, in floodplains, in wetlands, and it also fired back on the navigation sector itself, because the lowering of water levels in the end also caused problems for navigation. Then let me see, there was another question. A question by Jagdish Krishnaswamy. In the Brahmaputra and other rivers, there are several large river islands that are important habitats for several species of birds, crocodiles, and turtles, besides acting as stepping stone corridors for even large wild mammals. What is known about how the waterways are likely to impact these habitats? There was also another answer, but I will read my answer. In my presentation, I asked to be very cautious with narrowing, and that means basically a plea for improving navigability without substantial narrowing of the Brahmaputra. The point is that many are in favor of narrowing the river on the way, because there are all kinds of perceived advantages. Land reclamation is an important driver for that. But that narrowing would definitely lead to the loss of islands and bars through bank erosions. So then in terms, okay, I know the Majuli Island is also important for many other reasons, not for ecology. But if we simply think of habitats in ecology, permanently dry islands may offer the same habitats as the mainland, so maybe that is not the main issue. But the bars that are submerged part of the year present the habitats on their own, and their areas would definitely be reduced if the river would be narrowed. And then I added a story about an argument that is, I mentioned here an urban legend, that is often mentioned when people speak about the narrowing of the Brahmaputra, because they say that the present width of the Brahmaputra is not normal, it's anomalous, because it was caused by a sedimentation wave due to the Assam earthquake in 1950, which may have contributed, I mean, it is plausible, But the idea is then that the river is now moving back to a natural narrower width, and that this narrow width that is natural should be claimed and fixed. And then if we look into history, however, we see that Brahmaputra has had more phases of widening and narrowing. It could even be not only due to earthquakes, but also to variations over decades in hydrology. And that means that periods of a large width are actually part of the natural behavior, and that stopping that process, blocking it, will have repercussions in the river response. Then something else will happen with the river. If it cannot adapt in the horizontal direction, it will adapt in the vertical direction and cause sedimentation and flooding, for instance. And then apart from that, this earthquake was not that exceptional. It was in 1950, I think the magnitude was 8.7, but also in 1897, there was a similar earthquake that also has similar effects on the river that have also been documented by Indian researchers. And then let me see. Again, another question that was that inland waterway transport is a serious impact for conservation of flora and fauna. And then it speaks about mitigation measures. Let me see, what was the question? I just, based on this, it was not an answer to the question, but it is sharing an experience on the mitigation measures that are mentioned. And the experience is from restoration in the River Rhine, an intervention that was primarily meant to mitigate the bed erosion, that is now a problem, but was found to be very positive for ecology. And it is that groins, those are the river training structures perpendicular to the banks, they were replaced by longitudinal training walls that divide the river into a main channel and a parallel sheltered channel. And the sheltered zones, they had less noise from ships that were passing, and also less stress to organisms due to the water motion if vessels pass. It's mainly the primary waves that cause very frequent and very large variations along the river banks. Now, the ecological monitoring of the intervention demonstrated that indeed the density and the diversity of species increased substantially, and also that species that were believed to be extinct in this part of the Rhine returned. So a mitigation measure that could also be, it was meant to mitigate effects of bed erosion, but it could also be seen as a mitigation measure for the effects of navigation on flora and fauna, that it can be really effective.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Eric. So we'll move to other panelists also in case anyone else has further comments or reflections to share. भाईराम सहानी जी या दास जी, आप लोगों को कुछ अपना ऐसी कोई बात है जो आप लोग पहले नहीं कह पाए, जो अभी आपको कहना चाहेंगे बाकी लोगों को सुनने के बाद भी?
हेलो।
हाँ जी भाईराम जी।
जी मैम, अभी तो बस इतना ही है। मैं यही चाहूंगा कि आगे भी जो भी पैनलिस्ट हैं या जो भी इसमें मतलब इसमें पर्यावरण को बचाने वाले हैं, वो हम लोगों को सुझाव दें और हम लोगों का मार्गदर्शन करें, और हम लोग क्या भविष्य में बेहतर करें कि न सरकार का विरोध भी हो और हम अपना बचाव भी कर लें, और सरकार की जो योजनाएं हैं वो भी काम करें, और हम लोगों को भी जीवन जीने का सहूलियत और जो सुविधाएं वो मुहैया हो, जिससे कि ये न लगे कि सरकार और जनता में टकराव की स्थिति पैदा हो रही है। तो आप लोग जानकार हैं, आप लोग ऐसे परिस्थितियों से झेले हुए हैं, ऐसे विकल्पों को आप जानते होंगे, वो बातें हम लोगों को शेयर करें, ताकि अधिकारीगण से हम लोग वही बात रखें जिससे कि उनकी परियोजना को प्रभावित भी हम न करने वाली बात करें और ना ही हमारे जीवन को प्रभावित करने वाले वो कार्य करें। मैं यही चाहता हूं और यही उम्मीद भी रखता हूं सरकार से भी और आप लोग से भी यही सहयोग चाहूंगा।
Ji, thank you, Bairam ji. Just to briefly translate, Bairam ji is requesting all of us to possibly offer a solution to these problems, so that it is not just about struggling against the government, but also about what solution we can offer to these problems that are being created, and in general, a solution to people's livelihoods. And he would like support of all the people who are part of this panel and others who can actually support their struggle. मिलन दास जी, अगर आप कुछ कहना चाहें, अगर आप अभी भी जुड़े हुए हैं।
प्रॉब्लम जो है ये हम जो नेचर के ऊपर डिपेंडेंट करते हैं, हम लोगों का लाइवलीहुड, अभी जो डेवलपमेंट के नाम पर जो जो उद्योग हो रहा है गवर्नमेंट का, तो पहले ये लोगों को देखिए, ये एक चीज समझना सबको चाहिए, हम लोगों को समझ में आ रही है, हमारा लाइवलीहुड बचाने के लिए हम लोग कोशिश कर रहा है। इसका मतलब ये नहीं सिर्फ हम लोग हमारे बात सोच रहे हैं। देखिए, आप मछली बच जाए तो वो चीप लेवल, जो चीप कम पैसे में जो ये मिलता है प्रोटीन, सबसे अच्छा क्वालिटी का जो प्रोटीन मिलता है, वो तो देश को खिलाती है ना हम लोग, तो देश का फूड सिक्योरिटी अच्छा हो जाएगा। तो इसका मतलब हम लोग फाइट कर रहा है, कुछ लोग ऐसे सोचेंगे जो उन्नयन का डेवलपमेंट के अगेंस्ट है, वो नहीं, हम लोग बचाने चाहते हैं देश लोगों को लिए, साथ साथ हमारा आजीविका को बचाने चाहते हैं। ये सिर्फ हमारा स्वार्थ इसके साथ जुड़ा हुआ नहीं है, ये पूरा देश का लोगों का फूड सिक्योरिटी का स्वार्थ जुड़ा हुआ है, ये देश को समझना चाहिए। ये जो पॉइंट हम लोग रेज किया, ये बचाना है, ये सिर्फ मछुआरों तो वो बोल रहा है, चिल्ला रहे काम की, उसको डायरेक्टली वो इफेक्ट हो रहा है, लेकिन ये पूरा देश को, जितने सारे अभी इंडिया में 80 करोड़ लोग मछली खाते हैं इंडिया में, 80 करोड़ लोग, तो 80 करोड़ लोगों का फूड सिक्योरिटी अभी प्रॉब्लम, खतरा है। तो ये 80 करोड़ लोगों को सोचना चाहिए, ये मत सोचिए मैं 80 करोड़ को लोगों को बोलता हूँ ये कि सिर्फ हम लोगों का प्रॉब्लम है, आप लोग सो जाइए, उतना तक।
थैंक यू मिलन जी, आपने इम्पोर्टेंट बात कही कि ये सिर्फ आपकी जगह की बात नहीं है, बल्कि सभी की जगह की बात है, और पर्यावरण की सुरक्षा की बात है, और किसी डेवलपमेंट के अगेंस्ट उस तरीके से बात नहीं है। So Milan ji was saying that this is not just about struggling against the government or being anti-development, but it is really about protection of lands, peoples, their livelihoods and ecosystems. And so people need to join us in our struggle, not as against development, but as against, but for protection of these important livelihoods and ecosystems. Thank you, Dasji. So there's one question that Shripath had asked early on to Nachiket ji, that when you say downsizing, would you say lesser depth and smaller ships, or only number of ships passing in a given time? Nachiket, I don't know if you've been able to answer that question earlier in Q&A, but this was in the chat box. So in case you haven't, would you like to answer this now?
Yeah, I had answered it. Basically, lesser ships and smaller, of course, if possible, but also fewer ships, I think, would be the, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Nachiket ji. There was also another.
Government.
Sorry. कुछ कह रहे थे?
I think go ahead.
Ask a clarificatory question to Nachiket on this.
Yeah, of course, Shripath, go ahead.
So basically what I want to understand is both have their trade-offs, right? Lesser number of ships, but there is also a consideration that bigger ships are more economical. So bigger ships but less number, is that a better solution, or you think that the size itself also matters and the number of, I mean, how would you see this trade-off? And I understand that maybe this needs some more study, but how would you see the to, in terms of the trade-offs?
Yeah, I agree. It needs more study, and I can't really say more specifically. But I think the projections that are there seem, at least to me, with my limited understanding, the the projections made for the waterways seem excessive. The other thing is the purpose of why we need waterways. While various purposes are important, and it's really difficult to prioritize one over the other. Is it the cumulative impacts is what I'm saying more so. I think whether it's a bigger ship but fewer in number, or smaller ships more in number, I can't really answer that at that detail as of now. But I think where the how we sort of prioritize, how we differentiate between how much can be how much can take place in the waterway, how many ships can actually go, while optimizing for viability and ecological risk, damage, safety risks. I think the optimization question is important. I think somewhere we have to go in that direction. Yeah.
Thanks, Nachiket ji. So now we'll move towards wrapping up this session because we just 5 minutes into it. And so thanks first of all to all the panelists for this really comprehensive information around the impacts, ranging from scientific study, research to experiences from the ground. And what it shows us that there are some serious impacts on the biodiversity and habitat of the river, some really critically endangered like the dolphins and others. There's excessive pollution to rivers in terms of noise and pollutants being thrown in the river. Excessive dredging is also making river lifeless, and there's excessive impacts on the subsistence livelihoods and traditional livelihoods of several local communities and people all of you have shared about how it's affecting your livelihoods. Land acquisition with no plans for how do you rehabilitate these people affected by this. There's impacts on the access to be able to go to these ghats, which are such important spaces of actually people coming together and congregate. And it also shows that no ground consultations and engagements with the local communities in being able to actually plan this and show what impacts it has. And somehow it seems that it is being promoted as all this environment friendly and carbon kind of a project or an idea, but it is not really so. It is one of those false solutions that is actually going through without any proper scrutiny that it is supposed to go through. So this seems like scary a bit, and all these presentations have captured that. So hopefully in the next few days, in some which Arunji was saying and also Nachiket ji was hinting at, that we need to come up with some ideas of what alternative could be to it, which could also be a combination of other things, with solutions of how do we the way we are actually doing this, and also alternatives from and by the communities. So thanks again for this presentation, and thanks to IRF for organizing this session. I will hand it over to Siddharth because I think there are some announcements to be made. Over to you, Siddharth. Thank you. And thanks again to all the panelists.
Right. Thank you everyone. Thanks Srishti for moderating that so well. I'll just take 5 minutes of your time, even less than 5 minutes, just some basic announcements to be made. First of all, incredible discussions all through the day. We've heard so many different perspectives, which is very important, that we don't only hear one perspective, but so many different perspectives, especially those from the ground of those who are affected. Today we had sessions 1, 2, and 3 of India Rivers Week 2022. Tomorrow we will have sessions 4 and 5. And session 5 will also have our annual award ceremony, where we celebrate those who work on conserving our rivers, and also journalists who are working constantly on covering stories around rivers. So please join us tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Indian Standard Time for session 4. And session 5 will happen at 2 p.m. Indian Standard Time tomorrow. I will repeat all of this in Hindi now. सभी को बहुत धन्यवाद आज हमारे साथ जुड़ने के लिए। आज बहुत ही बेहतरीन डिस्कशन हुआ पूरे दिन, बहुत अलग अलग पक्ष सामने रखे गए, सभी लोगों से हमें सुनने को मिला। काफी लोग जो प्रभावित हैं ऐसे प्रोजेक्ट से, उनसे हमें बातें सुनने को मिली जो बहुत जरूरी हैं, क्योंकि अक्सर बाहर ये बातें नहीं जा पाती हैं। और अगर हमारे प्लेटफॉर्म के माध्यम से आपकी बात बाहर जा रही है तो बहुत ही जरूरी है कि ये प्लेटफॉर्म ये काम कर पा रहा है, और हम बहुत खुश हैं इस बात को लेकर। आज हमारा इंडिया रिवर्स वीक का जो प्रोग्राम है उसका सेशन 1, 2 और 3 आज सुबह 9, 9:30 बजे से चालू है। अभी हम समापन की तरफ जा रहे हैं, और कल सेशन 4 और 5 सुबह 10 बजे शुरू होगा। और सेशन 5 में हम अपना जो एनुअल अवार्ड प्रोग्राम है वो भी करेंगे, जहाँ पर ऐसे लोग जो नदियों पर काम करते हैं, नदियों के रक्षा के लिए काम करते हैं, और ऐसे जो जर्नलिस्ट हैं, ऐसे जो पत्रकार हैं जो नदियों के बारे में लिखते हैं, उनको पुरस्कारित किया जाएगा कल हमारे 5वें सेशन में। तो मैं जरूर चाहूंगा कि आप सभी कल भी जुड़े हमारे साथ। कल सुबह 10 बजे प्रोग्राम स्टार्ट होगा, चौथा सेशन, और दोपहर के 2 बजे हमारा 5वां सेशन स्टार्ट होगा। तो आप सब जरूर जुड़ें। एनीवेज अगर जैसे ही प्रोग्राम खत्म होता है कल सोमवार या मंगलवार तक, हम आपको रिकॉर्डिंग्स जो भी हैं वो सारे भेज देंगे, और अगले कुछ हफ्तों में प्रेजेंटेशंस के साथ साथ फॉलो अप रिपोर्ट्स भी आपके साथ शेयर किए जाएंगे। सो उसके साथ सभी को बहुत धन्यवाद। थैंक यू एवरीवन फॉर ज्वाइनिंग, एंड वी विल होपफुली सी यू टुमारो टू टेक दिस डिस्कशन इवन फर्दर।